Yeah, lunch was very, very good. So before I get started, I just want to give some thanks to the people that have helped me to bring this talk to you, iteration by iteration. So in January, I was at .Swift in Paris, which is a fantastic conference. And I decided to try it out as a lightning talk. And I got some really good feedback, and it kind of encouraged me that there was something that might be interesting to say about this. Then I went to an event in London called Off Yeast, and I proposed the topic as something that I thought might be interesting to discuss, mostly so I could get their ideas, kind of incorporate them. And I got some really fantastic feedback and ideas. And I'm going to talk more about lean coffee in a minute, in fact. There is, of course, the UIKonf anonymous peer review, which is how I got to this point, which is an incredible system. If you didn't submit an idea this year, I really encourage you to do it. It's fantastic. The most interesting thing for me was that people encouraged me to think bigger, and lots of people said that they thought it was something that was worth saying, which was really encouraging. So yeah, again, thank you very much if you did choose to comment. It was really, really valuable to me. And then I went to this event. This is Agile on the Beach, Agile on the Bench, my apologies, which is, as you can probably see, it's in a park in London. And the whole kind of setup is you go there with your lunch at lunchtime, and you do your talks. And of course, being in a park, there's no plugs, so it's without tech. So I just got a notebook. And again, I got some really great feedback. I don't know what I was doing at this point in the talk, but this is me at Ennis London. Daniel saw my talk. Daniel, who runs Ennis London, saw my talk at .Swift, and he said, "I think this is something that's interesting. You should maybe try and think if you can take this to half an hour and bring it to Ennis London." So that's what I did. And again, I got some incredible feedback, lots of really constructive criticism as well. Which brings us to here, where we are now. So basically what I want to say is that I urge you, to come and find me afterwards, to tweet me or to find me on Slack. Give me your feedback, give me your ideas. I'd like to keep this conversation going. And which is really all to say that if you find this talk useful, then please remember that I'm speaking for a lot of people who couldn't be here with me. A lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are ideas, thoughts, feedback that I got from other people. So I just wanted to give them the credit for that. And if not, then the fault is definitely all mine, because they were great ideas and it was fantastic feedback. And I just haven't been able to convey it properly. But without further ado, let's begin. So it was my first iOS project, and the previous sole developer on the project was leaving. And we were to have a week of handover. Except he managed to boil that handover down to the last 45 minutes before he left the company for good. But it was okay, because he gave me some really sage advice. And so I downloaded the Objective-C guide, and I took it home, and I read it, and I shipped some production code to the App Store a week later. Now, let's fast forward about a year, a couple of years, and I'm in the pub. And I get introduced to somebody called Sam. Not his real name, which will become obvious why in a moment. And I got introduced to Sam kind of like this. This is going to stand in for Sam. Sam, this is Michael. He used to work at Company X, where you were working for a while. And Sam said, "Michael May." I was like, "Yeah, that's me." And he was like, "Dude, your code is fucking terrible." And then he went on for about half an hour about all the crimes that I committed against the coding. So what I want to do now is, let's just imagine that Sam is in full rant. He clearly is. And we're going to just going to turn the volume down on him for a little while. And imagine he's sort of maybe like a little devil on my shoulder, kind of telling me all the crimes that I've committed. And we'll come back to him in a little bit. But yeah, just imagine this sort of low-volume tirade of all the things I've done, singletons and all sorts of terrible things on my shoulder. So yeah, that was me then. This is apparently me now. I was working at Songkick, and they have like an internal avatar generator for like team events. This is apparently me, but I don't have blue eyes, and I don't own a yellow jumper, and I don't have red trousers. So I'm not quite sure how they generated that avatar, but apparently that was me. So that was my first iOS project, but obviously it wasn't my last. And what I really want to just sort of convey is that there have been many more since, and almost every single one has been a project where I have inherited a code base. Almost never have I started on a fresh project. So that's a little bit about me, and I want to kind of know some things about you now. So I'm going to do a quick straw poll. There'll be a few, actually. And because I don't have time to count you all or get the cameras turned around or whatever, I'm just going to do it via claps instead. So if I ask you a question and you would normally kind of put your hand up, if you just clap instead, that would be great. You get that? Excellent. Excellent. Right, so who here works on a legacy code base? It's about what you would expect, I think. And who here would like to have a serious word with some of the authors of that previous code base? Yeah. So I would have clapped for the first one, although I'm between jobs at the moment, so I could, who knows what's next. But I'm going to explain why I wouldn't clap for the second one. But maybe, it's after lunch, and maybe some of you didn't clap for either, and you're thinking now is like a really great time for a coffee, which, by the way, is fantastic coffee here. It's probably the best coffee I've ever had at a conference. So huge props to UIKonf. So yeah, maybe it's time for a coffee or a beer, or maybe just a nap. But I'm going to try and persuade you to stay here for a little bit longer. See, last year I heard at least 3 talks where Objective-C was described as either a legacy language or actually a dinosaur. Which, are you all 100% Swift yet? That's way more than like the 2 times I've done that question before. Well, let's try this instead then. So Michael Feathers says that legacy code is code without tests. 100% code coverage? Yeah, that's about right. Incidentally, I was putting these slides together, and I kept staring at this picture, and just something about him kind of drew me in, and I was staring at it, and then I suddenly saw this. And I was thinking, maybe Michael Feathers was trying to tell us something. But anyway, yeah, I digress. So at some point, you probably will be working on a legacy code base, even if you aren't right now. But that's OK. You're going to go through a few stages, but it's going to be all right. Don't worry. I mean, you're going to start off with a bit of denial. And then you're probably going to get really, really angry. You're probably going to start bargaining at some point. I know I've certainly been in this position. And then, of course, some depression will hit. And then you'll finally just accept it. But I'm just going to have some water. But what if instead of assuming that the code was the work of some feckless idiot, what if we assumed that it was someone just like us? What if instead of resenting the names in the Git blame, you try instead to be empathetic? If you can see that it's wrong, why couldn't they? What clues could you see in the code? What context might you be able to find that could help you to understand how it got to that point? Now, I'm not saying there are no feckless idiots in the programming world. Obviously, none of you are. But I've certainly been one sometimes. And I think Sam on my shoulder is probably telling me right now that I am a feckless idiot, or that I have been. But let's think about just one thing, right? Like, how did the AppDelegate get to 2,000 lines? Well, maybe they were just taught by Apple. I mean, have you looked at Apple sample code? Start a new Xcode project and check core data. Boom, 110 lines, even in Swift. And all of your core data setup is in the AppDelegate. But then you're probably going to add push notifications. Well, you know where that's going to go. Maybe background fetch. I'm pretty sure you know where that's going to go as well. In fact, in the last talk, we saw some more stuff in the security one about what goes in the AppDelegate as well. Maybe you've got a watch kit extension. In it goes. Those 2,000 lines very quickly add up. And isn't that just as plausible as the last developer was a clueless hacker? Maybe even more so? Hopefully some of you are kind of maybe nodding along or sort of smiling ruefully at this point. And that's really good, because that means you have some empathy, and that's really what I want to talk about. So, as I mentioned, I've done some iterations of this talk at various different points to kind of build up to coming here. And one of the ones I did was this Lean Coffee event. And if you've never heard of Lean Coffee, it's in the UK, but it's also in Germany. I know that because the website is also in German. Or that's just odd that it's in German and they don't do it in Germany. I'm not sure which that is. But yeah, you propose talks. Everyone sits around a table and they propose talks on Post-it notes, stick them up on the wall, and then everyone votes. And the top ones, and then everyone discusses them in order. And what was really interesting was I proposed this idea of like being more empathetic as an engineer. And in a room where it turned out I was the only engineer, everyone else was pretty much all product managers, they voted it as their first topic they wanted to talk about. I thought it was very interesting given everyone was product manager. I think that's another talk in itself about like some sort of empathy between product managers and engineers. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that one of the attendees said this: if you don't have context, how can you iterate? You can't. You can only recreate. Which is simple, it's insightful, it's quite obvious, but I think I actually recognize it as an engineer as something else as well. See, I think that's basically like not invented here, which, if you've not heard of that term, is a sort of preference to write your own things rather than accept the things that already exist. Or maybe, if I'm being a bit kinder, it's more like the kind of IKEA effect in full effect, that sort of cognitive bias we have towards things that we built ourselves. I'm not saying rewriting is the wrong decision, but I think the really interesting thing about that is it's true. It's like if you don't have context, then you are just going to recreate. You can't possibly hope to iterate. And yet we mostly work in sort of agile environments these days, where part of the agile environment is that we embrace we embrace iteration and learning as part of the discovery process that brings us to, hopefully, a product that users want. So maybe we could do the same thing with code. Maybe if we embraced the idea of the code that's already there and use that as a way to learn and then iterate, or maybe that would be part of the discovery process that provides us with a better code base. Okay, so a couple more straw polls now. So who here has used AF networking? Yeah. Not quite as many as I thought, maybe. So you'll probably all remember this story then. I tried to rewrite it with a bit more empathy. In fact, actually, let me add just one more thing. I think I'm maybe not the best job, but I think this adds quite a lot more to the story. What about CocoaPods? Who uses CocoaPods? Who doesn't use CocoaPods? So then you know about some of the recent issues with slowness and so on that they've been working with as they've got to the 1.0. The thing is, like, I have my preferences, and I'm happy to talk about them in the pub. In fact, I'm happy to always talk in the pub. But publicly shaming people about their work, it's just not cool. But the thing is, we all do it sometimes, and I wonder why. See, I doubt that Hossam, in the previous slide, the tweet, is actually a bad person. In fact, I very much doubt that they are. I suspect there is just as good a developer and a human being as the rest of us. But I wonder if Hossam would have said those things if he had actually spoken directly to like Fabio or to Sam or to Eloy or to Marius or Kyle or Boris or really any of these people. And if not, like, why not? And I think it's because it's really easy in our industry with so much of our communication being digital to reduce ourselves to just like, avatars and to usernames and to comments and pull requests and tweets and emojis. And when that happens, it's really easy to attack. It's like you're just JPEGs and GIFs and UTF-8 characters. But I think if we practice being more empathetic, maybe we could turn that stuff back into a real human being again. So at that same Lean Coffee event, which is just a really fantastic morning, I was introduced to this idea of a thing called creative Aikido, which I'd never heard of before. And I did a lot of Googling for it, and I couldn't find very many references at all. But I did find a blog post about engaging in one from an event called Leading Creative Collaboration. And I really love the positive tone of it, the idea of like working with constraints and ideas that are worth discussing and common ground and building on ideas. And I thought about it some more, and I thought, well, it sort of sounds like working with existing code, maybe, and an idea that code is actually worth iterating on, and maybe you could build on the code by refactoring rather than simply rewriting. And I also thought, well, leading creative collaboration, that kind of sounds like pair programming, or maybe just working on a team. I mean, if I'm collaborating with people, I'd quite like it to be creative. Okay, so I talked quite a lot about old code. Let's talk about some of the new code, because it's what we do every day, right? What about pull requests? We've heard a little bit about pull requests in some of the other talks as well. And there's an amazing article from Slack about how they deal with pull requests and what they think of pull requests. And I've just pulled out one small quote, which I think is fantastic. Empathy is humanity's most important superpower. And that empathy with pull requests is very important. So I was going to try and summarize the rest of their blog post, which this is like some of it, and I'm not even going to go into this. And I had a summary slide. But then yesterday, Laura did her talk, and she just nailed it. So I've borrowed from Laura, and I hope she doesn't mind. I think when I read this blog post and I thought about it, I thought, well, that's the kind of pull request that I would like, one that gives me empathy for the position that the program was in. And moreover, I suspect that if I wrote pull requests that gave empathy to people about how and context, about what I was thinking and the decisions that I made, maybe I would get better reviews back as well. So I talked about this at Ennis London, and one of the pieces of feedback I got was this, that we need to have thicker skins, that if we did, then maybe we wouldn't get so upset about pull requests which are critical. And I know the guy who said this very well, and he's clearly quite opinionated, but he's also very friendly and respectful and kind. This wasn't meant to be mean at all. So I've thought about it a lot since, and I've come to the conclusion that I think he's right, but I also think he's wrong. I think once again, with context and empathy, we could achieve the same thing. So I want to tell you another little story. We'll get back to Sam in a minute. This is someone else. Not very long ago, I was doing a code review for a new member of my team. They'd only been joined a few weeks, and I was actually on holiday, sort of, but I was checking in the start of the day and the end of the day. And this was actually the code. And so my immediate response was dead code, which I think is technically right, but the really important thing is that's not actually the best thing I could have done. See, I wasn't in the office. I was remote, and they were brand new to the project, and my sole communication with them that day had been this, and a steadfast refusal to merge their pull requests, and then I disappeared out for cycling around Essex for the day in the sunshine. It was great for me. They got to stew for the whole day. I might as well have just said, you're a terrible programmer, and you're messing with my baby, and I'll probably fire you when I return. But if I'd considered context, that they were new, as I say, and alone, maybe I would have simply said, emailed them and said, should we pick this up when we get back? Or what benefits do you see from having this code there? Or how are you doing in general? You've just started and you're settling in, and I'm not around that much. How are you doing? Or, should we have a Skype chat? Well, I mean, anything, really, that would have actually connected us as human beings again instead of a dead code and a pull request. And the thing is, it took weeks to fix it. We ended up in a pub. You can see a theme maybe running here a little bit. And then the two of us kind of started talking, and as we men often do, we didn't really talk about what had happened for quite some time. We just kind of talked around it. But the really important thing was I kind of realized, I remembered really quickly why I liked this person, and I realized how actually they were smart, and they were very, very competent, and I'd hired them for all of those reasons. But somewhere along the way, we just had this colossal communications error. I thought I was doing the right thing by checking in every day, and he thought I was just, he had a little Michael on his shoulder, essentially. But once we started talking, it just dissolved. So, yeah, I think we could benefit from being thicker skinned. That would probably have fixed this situation. But at the same time, I think I'd prefer us to be more empathetic, because that would have avoided this situation too. And that's a much more constructive and positive thing to practice, I think. Now, I know that at least one person in the audience is thinking about Justin Searle's social coding contract right now. And I know this because during the anonymous peer review, they told me about it, and I had not heard about this, and it's a fantastic talk. If you haven't watched it, then it's well worth 30 minutes of your time. This is him. And he talks about many of the same topics that I'm now talking about, but much more from the idea of just open source. And again, I'm just going to pull out one line that I just resonated with me so much. There really is something magical about us when we actually communicate together. I might even go so far as to say that it's kind of like we have superpowers. I think that the best defense that we have against communicating like bots, dead code, is to practice our superpowers, to practice being more empathetic. And the really cool thing about this superpower is that you don't need to be bathed in gamma radiation, or you don't need to be bitten by a spider or from another planet. You just got to practice. It's like any skill. You just practice, you'll become more proficient. And so I thought I'd give you a few little tips about how I've been trying to be more empathetic since those incidents. So, I'm trying to remember that we're not the code. I think that is possibly the most important. But we're also not our avatars or our pull requests or our tweets or our comments or our emojis, especially not the little poo. Try to be curious and not judgmental of other people's work. To consider the context so that you could iterate on that work and not just recreate each time. But also to give context so that other people can empathize and iterate on your work. Just one moment. And maybe you could try a creative Aikido session as well, if you can find a way to do it online. I'm really struggling to find it. Maybe I should reach out to these people and find out how it was actually run. And so, if that's all a bit too warm and fuzzy for you, let me give you a few other kind of motivations for why I think this might be better to be empathetic than, say, thick-skinned. There's an increasing body of evidence that suggests that workplace motivations have changed. As we've all got much more job security, job security, I guess, but certainly more reasonable wages, the things that we're kind of interested in have really changed. We're much more interested in things like respect now and providing good service and the people that you work with. And the really interesting thing is that I think the top three, they involve you communicating with other human beings. And what is one of the best ways that we can communicate together is to be empathetic to each other. And I think maybe being happy is not just a nice to have. There is growing body of evidence that it actually makes us healthier too. I mean, unless you're a particular fan of colds and heart attacks, then maybe being more empathetic would make you happier, which might actually make you healthier and live longer. And if that wasn't enough already, then I want to finally appeal to your kind of collegiate side, maybe also to your wallet. See, it's not just about me or about you. It's about our whole community. It's about our employers. It's about our teammates. It's about the public in general. How do they view us? Well, they view us by what they see of us. They view us through our comments, our usernames, our avatars, our tweets, our emojis, the same things again. And if we view the work that other people do as like sucking on a lemon, then what are we telling those people? We're telling them that I think we're telling them that our industry is quite egotistical and that it is uncollaborative and unprofessional. Does that sound like you? Does that sound like what you'd like other people to think of you? I mean, I don't know about you, but when I think about the app community that I'm in, particularly sort of in London with things like Ennis London, the words that come to mind are things like nice and professional and community. I know these things to be true, but I don't know if everyone else does. Okay, so I think it's probably time that we return to Sam. Hopefully he's cooled down a little bit by now. He stopped telling me everything I've done wrong. Yeah, he's got a few more beers, so he's probably calmed down now. So after meeting Sam for that first time, there were a couple of years later, I needed some more engineers on a project, and I ended up interviewing Sam, and I hired him. And a few weeks went by, and we went out to the pub, unsurprisingly, and of course he eventually asked the question, like, why did you hire me? Because I told you how terrible you were the last time we met you. And I said, well, you obviously cared. I could tell from the interview that you were very competent, and I really hoped that with a bit more context, you'd also have some more empathy for what happened and where I was at that time. And the really cool thing for me is that, like, Sam is now a really good friend of mine, a very, very good friend, very dear. He knows I'm doing this talk, and he couldn't be here. He may be watching it on the stream now. He doesn't know I enjoyed-ified him, so I'm not sure how he'll feel about that, but we'll find out later. But yeah, so through that, I became friends with him. He did a fantastic job on the project, and yeah, basically, I was right. So what am I saying with all this? Well, all I'm really saying is that the next time you feel the need to git blame and have a rant and feel incensed, maybe try looking for some context instead. Maybe try and feel some empathy. Because, you know what, who knows? That Git username, it might even be yours. Thank you very much.